Hello everyone, and welcome to the bonus clip for Season 5, Episode 4, which was our episode on the Solarpunk Conference. For the bonus clip first, I would like to direct your attention to the video of the presentation that Ariel was a part of for the 2023 Solarpunk Conference. You can find it on the Solarpunk Conference's YouTube channel, and that particular video is entitled From Capitalist Realism to a Solarpunk Reality, Building the Infrastructure of a Better Future. Myself, I was unable to take part in the Solarpunk Conference for various reasons, but I do have a piece that's included in the conference journal, and since there's no presentation associated with that, I thought I would go ahead and read it for you. My piece is entitled, The Hope Solarpunk Gives to a Frustrated Climate Scientist. If there's a story that climate scientists can relate to, it's Cassandra's. No one believed her either. Worse, the more dire her predictions of a disastrous future, unless her people stopped doing what they were hell-bent on doing, like bringing the Trojan horse within the city walls, the more she was scorned. Although while at least no one ever accused her of being in it for the grant money, no one ever forgave her for being right either. I bet they despised her all the more for it, and blamed her for not doing more to warn them. Cassandra's story is not very solarpunk. There's nothing in there that would give hope to anyone, much less a climate scientist. Despite Cassandra's warnings, Troy gets sacked and its people are slaughtered and enslaved. Cassandra herself ends up raped, abducted, then murdered. But the worst part of Cassandra's story for a climate scientist is the moment, as they're reading it, that they realize that the human race doesn't change. Her story is 3,000, 4,000 years old? Bronze Age mythmakers had already figured out that it's a futile, brutal, thankless job trying to stop your people from sleepwalking into disaster by telling them that's exactly what they're doing. And yet, climate scientists persist, as if there's no other way to get humanity to stop emitting so much greenhouse gas to the atmosphere than to explain to them the scientific basis of the problem, show them the scope of the evidence, outline the predictions for how bad the effects will be, and give viable suggestions for getting our greenhouse gas emissions under control ASAP. I mean, honestly, how dumb of them, right? Meanwhile, we have lost so much time and so much opportunity to avert disaster. Just imagine what shape we'd be in today if we had started switching over to renewables in the late 1970s, back when President Jimmy Carter had solar panels installed on the roof of the White House. Today, atmospheric concentrations of the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide would be closer to the roughly 340 parts per million, or ppm, they were back then, than to the far more catastrophic 420 ppm they'd reached as of May 2023, so that was a year ago when I wrote this, with no end to the skyrocketing in sight. Or, what if we'd taken heed in the 1990s, when climate scientists, and climate-adjacent scientists like biogeochemists, geochemists, oceanographers, and ecologists began loudly sounding the alarm about global warming and climate change. If we'd started to shift over to renewable sources of energy then, we'd already be finished with fossil fuels. Atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide would be something closer to the 350 ppm of the early 1990s. Large swaths of the world would not be burning every summer, and heat waves would not already be threatening to hit temperatures hot enough to kill even the young and robust. But we couldn't stand listening to the climate scientists tell us what we were doing so dreadfully wrong. Instead, we let the oil companies, and what I've come to think of as the climate charlatans, have all the narrative fun, telling those stories that they did about corrupt and idiotic climate scientists, etc. and so forth. Why make radical changes to the way you and your country produce and consume goods, energy, and food, when instead you could mock, belittle, and slander climate scientists and politicians trying to do something about climate change? But we can't expect scientists to tell stories. That is exactly not their job. Their job is to traffic in facts, to keep doing the research to determine exactly what the global warming problem is, what effects of climate change we need to brace for, and how we might start working our way out of this mess. Their job is to keep publishing their scientific papers and reports so that politicians, whose job it is to turn information into policy, have the information they need to create the laws, allocate the funding, and initiate the big infrastructure projects that would eliminate our use of fossil fuels and minimize, or even reverse, our devastation of Earth's ecosystems. Because without those changes by governments, humanity as a whole is going to keep flying, driving, buying too much stuff, and eating way too much meat and dairy. Because we all work within our milieu. When you live in Rome, you do as Romans do. And when you move to America, you end up with a big gas-guzzling car. It's what there is for you to use. And it's hard to thrive when you're swimming hard against the currents of your society. Most of us are just hanging in there as it is. This, of course, is where Solarpunk comes in. Climate scientists shouldn't write fiction, not as part of their work as scientists. Like Cassandra, they need to stick to stories with arcs that follow facts through to consequences. But the rest of us are free to tell stories with arcs involving characters, setting, conflict, and emotions. The rest of us are free to tell tales in which people can see themselves tackling the problem of climate change, or living marvelously in a future where we've solved that problem. That's why Solarpunk made my heart soar when I first learned about it. To some people, Solarpunk stories might mean social justice, community gardens, vertical farming, and heavily vegetated cities with fabulous public transportation networks, and all sorts of amazing, colorful culture. But for the biogeochemist in me, Solarpunk stories are a way to get people excited about the renewable energy revolution and thinking about geoengineering carbon dioxide safely back out of the atmosphere to calm the greenhouse effect back down to where it was at 280 parts per million CO2. In other words, where it was before we started burning fossil fuels and raising wilderness to make way for farms and fields. Because it needs a war effort. And never mind that the alternative is catastrophic, the outcome would be a vibrant economy, thriving people, plenitude, and great soothing swaths of revitalized wilderness for everyone to enjoy. As a scientist, I'm totally gung-ho about the scientific aspects of these stories. But I recognize that opinions may differ about how scientific these stories need to be. Do they need to be as seriously wonkishly factual as Kim Stanley Robinson's bestseller, The Ministry for the Future, which laid out a mostly plausible roadmap by which the world gets greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore global warming and the climate change it fuels, under control? The Ministry for the Future made it seem so easy for us to tame our carbon dioxide emissions and geoengineer some of the excess carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And so worth it. Although as I read it, even I felt my eyes glaze over at some of the detail. Yet it was inspiring. As a former professor of biogeochemistry, I know my stuff when it comes to what controls Earth's surface temperature, the biogeochemical cycling of carbon, humanity's greenhouse gas emissions, and what the various means proposed for carbon dioxide removal and solar radiation management entail. But the Ministry of the Future made me feel, honestly and truly, for the very first time, that we will someday manage to stop global warming, and that a nicer world where we don't have to worry anymore about climate change is in our future. As a scientist who has given up working as a scientist, this puts me in a good position to write the sort of stories I'm talking about. But I don't know if I'll ever succeed at writing hard science solarpunk stories that anyone would want to read or an editor would want to publish. Plus, I still feel like I'm just the facts person at heart. But hello, the other thing Solarpunk is all about is teamwork and community. I can lend out my expertise to people who are better storytellers than I am. So here's my offer to the Solarpunk community. I have a few hours a week that I'm willing to donate to the cause of checking the climate science in stories that people are working on. I know how the climate system works on multiple different time frames. Again, I'm up on my geoengineering. I know how they make solar panels, from the creation of silicon crystals all the way up to the fabrication of panels in factories. I've seen it done. And because my other half has a company that installs solar energy systems, I hear all the time about what needs to be done to the grid to bring it up to the standard and extent it needs to be in order for us to depend almost entirely upon wind and solar sources of energy. Drop me an email at christina.solarpunkpresence@gmail.com and we'll see what we can do together to get people fired up about the great changes we need to make to our production and consumption of energy in order to live in a near future that's fantastic.